Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to address Quantum's response to my question on his best evidence against the theory of evolution. Quantum, as I suspected, you have some misconceptions that we need to talk about. So let's get started.
You asked, what is my argument against the theory of evolution? Well, for one, the evolution process takes about 1 million years for major changes from one species to another. Google even stated that in the same area, by the way, for reasons not completely clear, during this basic search that I just said, they publicized this on August 22nd of 2011.
So let's discuss this idea that it takes about 1 million years for significant changes to accumulate for speciation to occur. Now, while it is true that going from chordates to vertebrates and vertebrates to tetrapods takes several million years for those morphological changes to become dominant, those are entire clades encompassing literally dozens of species. You seem to be conflating terms here. So what is the difference between clades and species? A clade is a group of biological taxa, such as species, that includes all descendants of a common ancestral group. This includes all extinct and extant lineages. The best way to visualize this is in the form of a family tree. Take this image from Berkeley University, Understanding Evolution. Notice that the top two cladograms, or family trees in this example, show common ancestry in green and blue. Green in this example would denote a relationship between you and two cousins through your mother and her sister or brother, with the root of that family tree being your grandparents. You are all related by common ancestry. The blue clade would be, again, in a family tree example, showing a direct lineage between you and your mother. Again, direct ancestry. Now, the examples in red and orange do not count as clades, either because in the case of the red example, they do not include all ancestors, or in the case of the orange example, they do not include all descendants. You have to have that. You have to have common ancestry to be considered part of the same clade. So in this case, from right to left, we are vertebrates because we have a spinal column. We are tetrapods because we have 4 extremities and we are adapted for life on land. And we are also mammals because we have body-wide hair follicles and mammary glands, which is what is necessitated to be a mammal. If it describes you, it defines you. Whereas if you were to go down any one of these paths that are not our own lineage, you would be describing something else. It's for this reason that asking for a dog to produce a cat is not going to happen. You can't grow out of your ancestry. Now, cats and dogs do share a common descent. They both come from a distinct form of carnivora. But asking them to jump from one clade into another that is adjacent to them and that they are not creating as they move up the line is not how evolution works. For something like that to happen, it would actually disprove evolution and not provide evidence in support of it. So, how is a species different from a clade? A species is a group of organisms capable of interbreeding and producing viable offspring. Viable in the sense that they can reproduce themselves. A great example of this is actually the Galapagos finches, sometimes called the Darwin finches. Now, I've talked about these birds before. Notice I've also included some of their taxonomic categories. I say some because this is actually based on the old Linnaean system, which frankly can't handle the weight of all the named clades in between each of these points. These Linnaean ranks now function more or less as placeholders, guideposts along the way. They're still valid, but the entire Linnaean system is largely useless now thanks to the new phylogenetic system that we are now using. Anyway, around 2 million years ago, the ancestral group of the Darwin finches made it to the Galapagos Islands. Now, they were in a very fortunate situation. They had plenty of food and no predators. They subsequently spread across the island pretty much unrestricted, but that came at a price. Eventually, they were competing for the same food sources. Now, this is where natural selection comes into play. A selective pressure was introduced that favored different beak sizes and shapes that allowed for feeding on uncontested food supplies. Eventually, the birds mated more often with the ones that shared their geographic location and their food sources. Now, this is the key point that I'm trying to make here. When you isolate a population either by geographical barrier or sexual preference, both of which apply here, the parent genome is no longer restricting the offshoots. They are allowed to diversify, which means that those beak shapes that were an aberration now can be favored more heavily. And this has been shown in research in the Darwin finches, where there's a speciation event occurring already today, and a group of blackcap birds in England, that this can happen in as little as 30 generations. So it does not take a million years for these speciation events to occur. That is what it takes for formation of entire clades. Now bear in mind, when we're talking about the formation of clades, we're looking at geologic time, deep time. That's where we get factors like millions of years. Now, once a group stops breeding with either the ancestral group or neighboring groups, it becomes a different species, either because they are not sexually preferred or because they're not physically compatible or even genetically compatible anymore. Now, all of this has been confirmed through genetic testing with the same accuracy that's used in paternity tests. I'll include a few links in the description for you to do some more research into it. I would have checked out your source that you seemed to be citing in your video. However, I couldn't find it because it wasn't linked in the description, and it was so vague that I couldn't turn it up. Let's move on.
So I find it refuting of evolution that a caterpillar undergoes the process of a 1 million year evolution in 5 to 25 days into a butterfly or moth from a caterpillar state. The entire process of the 1 million year evolution is in a caterpillar's DNA. To start at 5 to 25 days, of course, once they reach adulthood. The process of evolution is not acting on life, but rather not at all, because it doesn't take more than a 30-day period. And basic information says that evolution, the process thereof from one species to another, for changes to accumulate, etc., for major changes to occur, it takes about 1 million years.
Okay, so again, we've got a bit to unpack here. You seem to be confusing metamorphosis with evolution. They are two completely different processes. So, what is the difference? Well, let's take a look at metamorphosis first. The definition Wikipedia provides works the best for the explanation that I have to provide here. Notice how it talks about conspicuous and abrupt changes in structure via cell growth and differentiation. So how does this work? Well, to really explain this, we need to cover epigenetics. Well, what's epigenetics? At the most basic level, epigenetics is simply changes in an organism's gene expression. It's not changes in the DNA, it's differences in which genes are being expressed at what times. A simple example is how a queen bee is produced. When a larval bee is fed royal jelly, it activates or unlocks certain gene sequences inside the DNA that produce a queen bee. If the larva does not get the royal jelly, it simply becomes another drone. That's epigenetics. The royal jelly is an environmental factor that signals changes in gene expression in the DNA. These genes are activated not only through environmental factors, but also through the natural life cycle of some animals. When insects and some amphibians reach certain developmental stages, these gene sequences that initiate these rapid changes in their body plan are activated. Evolution, on the other hand, is the study of how life develops and diversifies over time. The difference being that caterpillars and butterflies, in this particular example, are not different species. Metamorphosis is part of the natural life cycle, from juvenile to adult. Evolution does not touch metamorphosis. That is something completely different. We're talking about, in the case of evolution, the diversification of species, like I talked about earlier. Let's continue.
I'm going to assume, because I haven't looked this up quite yet, I don't know anything about this specifically, but I'm going to assume tadpoles to frogs have that same DNA coding for a brief evolutionary process. Now, from these is evidence that evolution does not exist. And I would have to say that this is my best argument against the theory of evolution.
The same epigenetic rules apply for amphibians as well, as I mentioned before, so I'm not going to cover that again. Moving on.
I don't really care about the fossils. At this point, I can actually say the fossils are completely fake and made up by scientists and the government, etc. I can actually say that because species, life, nature, organisms, it kind of states the complete opposite of what the fossils indicate.
So we need to talk about fossils for a sec. I really don't see how your reasoning led you to think that these are all made up by government agencies or whatever, and I think I'll save that question for later. But for now, I do need to point out that I don't see a benefit from hoaxing fossils or the logistical feasibility of doing so.
Anyway, by the way, you're a very nice dude. I appreciate that. You know, there's a lot of atheists out there, a lot of people that disagree with me. They're always, a dick first. And that's why I'm usually a dick. Even if I'm a dick first, you know, it's probably because there's a lot of dicks out there. So, I look forward to a response, bro. So, see ya.
I endeavor to be polite and civil. It's, in fact, something I've been working on. There are some subjects that I will get worked up over, but by and large, I try to stay as chill as possible. I find getting upset or angry or yelling at people is frankly quite exhausting, and it's something that I do try to avoid, because once you start yelling at somebody, in my experience, they're not listening to you anymore. Well, that's it for now, Quantum. As with last time, you can find me in these places. For anyone watching, if you like what I do, please consider becoming a patron. And as always, stay curious.